After the Civil War, Chicago businessman George Pullman began hiring formerly enslaved black men to serve white passengers traveling across the country on his company's luxury sleeping cars. Their job was to lug baggage, shine shoes, set up and clean the sleeping cars, and serve meals and drinks to passengers. By the 1920s, the Pullman Palace Car Company had more than 20,000 African Americans working as Pullman Porters and train personnel. It was the largest category of black labor in the United States and Canada. While they were underpaid, overworked, and faced constant racism on the job, the Porters were integral to black life in Chicago and the civil rights movement.
Beyond the fact that in some cases it was a demeaning job, it was really a badge of honor. You know, in some cases this was like the first job that a lot of African Americans had. They worked 400 hours a month, you know, or 11,000 miles. To be able to stand up all of that time, get about maybe an hour or two of sleep in a smoking car, pretty labor intensive, but these were the guys that were able to buy property, send their kids to school, things of that nature, you know. And then in addition to that, they gave them an opportunity to travel.
It's one of those things, I'm glad you hit on it. A lot of times historians will say that Pullman Porters had the worst job on the train, but the best job on the block. And a lot of luminaries were formerly Pullman Porters, and then they went on to do other things. Can you list some of them for us?
Malcolm X was a porter for about a day.
Wow.
It definitely didn't fit his DNA. Elijah Muhammad. There are a lot of descendants of porters too. Whoopi Goldberg, Taraji Henson, her great-grand-uncle was Matthew Henson, the gentleman who found the North Pole, the navigator. Tom Joyner, Michelle Obama. So there are a lot of different people, you know, that came through the ranks or the bloodline of porters that went on to do great things.
The uniform behind me is the uniform he wore at the end of his career.
One of those descendants is Art Burden Jr., who grew up watching his father, Art Burden Sr., work the Porter train cars.
I had the opportunity, though, when I was 12 years old in 1962 to go with my father when he was working on a Ashton Topeka Santa Fe train called the Grand Canyon. And he was on the car that went up into the Grand Canyon. And that train went from Chicago to Los Angeles. One of the things that was very surprising was the number of suitcases he could carry at one time. You know, I was aware that people carry one on each arm, but it looked like he could put 3 or 4 on each side. He could carry near 8 suitcases at one time. That was quite illuminating to see. And, you know, just the camaraderie. It was a different way of life.
They covered a lot of ground and they opened the doors for a lot of different people. Even in New York, you know, A. Philip Randolph, who was actually the president of the union, he stood in solidarity with Malcolm X while they stood in solidarity with Puerto Rican hospital workers. So, you know, their proof of concept and model of organizing transcended all different lines.
I'm glad you mentioned organizing because the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters becomes the first black recognized union in this country. And we understand that it's the union that built the middle class, not only for white Americans, for black Americans as well. What do you think the history of blacks and unions, how do you think the Pullman Porters precedence affects us today?
First of all, you know, when they were first started, they were called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, dining car waiters, and maids. So on the side of the museum, you'll see a mural and you'll see women in that picture. You know, so these were gentlemen that opened the doors for even women to be organized in a very misogynistic environment, black or white. They made sure that the women had an opportunity to have part in that movement. They understood how important they were to the movement. They actually organized the March on Washington in 1941. So it was during that time that they did that because of discrimination going on in the armed forces. They were able to get a conversation with President Roosevelt, set up by Eleanor Roosevelt. And at that point, they were able to kind of force him to sign Executive Order 8802. And that's what banned all discriminatory practices in the armed forces and work-related fields.
The Pullman Porters started right here in Chicago with individuals like Milton Webster and others.
There would be no brotherhood without Webster. You know, Webster was the guy who organized everybody. As a matter of fact, Webster was the one that advocated for Randolph when everybody was going against him because they thought he was being paid. And it was at that point that he let them know that, no, Randolph just got a blank check and they said he could fill it out for up to 6 figures if he just stopped the union, the organizing of the union. But I'm saying, I'm vouching for him. You know what I mean? You all know me. I'm vouching for him. This guy is solid. We really need to follow this guy.
So for Randolph and Webster, 2 black men at the time, to stand up to a corporation, a company, and demand this typical labor demands, better wages, healthcare, things like that. I mean, how impactful was that at the time?
You know, this is where the heartbeat of the union world really started for black and white. What they were able to do is really just create a proof of concept of what successful organizing looks like. Now they took their organizing capacity outside of just union and said, okay, let's go to civil rights. But they started off about economic rights. It was all about economic equality and empowerment.
We have come to memorialize the 3rd anniversary of the historic United States Supreme Court decision.
It was imparting the middle class and then building momentum to enrich African American life, with the children of the Pullman Porters being able to attain education that many of the Porters never got.
It just seems like union organizing is in our blood, and then you couple that with the struggle of civil rights and the Great Migration to make Chicago the perfect place to launch a thing like the Pullman Porters. I talked to former Pullman Porters and the descendants of Pullman Porters who said that the Pullman Porters should be considered the start of the modern civil rights era.
I feel like that's the truth. You know, they're the grandfathers of it. Because again, it was because of their union organizing style that they said, okay, now let's take this body politic and then take it to civil. I mean, energy never dies, it just transfers. So this is a living, breathing, something that's going on. These guys were on the train, eavesdropping on prestigious businessmen, talking about how they were gonna get some money, talking about the plays they were gonna make. This is a good deal. Taking that information, sending it back home to their family members and saying, okay, look, I wanna do this, I wanna do that. And they had this ecosystem, if you will. But it had to have people with good jobs in order to sustain these types of businesses. So you had people who were sustaining businesses, starting businesses, supporting businesses, landowners, property owners, all because of their humility in a situation where they really should have been outraged. But they understood it was a bigger message. Their impact, it goes far beyond just them being some guys that worked on a train. That's why we're so adamant about creating the world's first and only Black labor tourism district right here in Pullman. And that's why it's a badge of honor for us to be able to tell that story here and really, really erect that mission here.